let's jump right into one of the most fascinating economic puzzles of our time. We're looking at a nation that's growing at an absolute breakneck pace, completely transforming its infrastructure and really commanding the global spotlight. But right under those massive headline numbers, there's a paradox. How exactly does a country build this monumental, mind-boggling aggregate wealth while its average citizen is still sitting in the lower middle income bracket? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the data. We'll look at where India stands, what's kind of holding things back, and the exact roadmap needed to hit that coveted high-income status. So let's start with the sheer scale of the situation. $3.9 trillion. That's India's approximate nominal GDP for 2024. And wow, that number firmly plants India as the world's fourth largest economy. It's an absolute powerhouse. We are talking about a massive, dynamic engine of global growth, powered by roughly 1.45 billion people. Now, when you hear a top-line number like 3.9 trillion, it is super easy to just assume widespread wealth. I mean, it sounds incredibly rich, right? And in aggregate, it definitely is. But as we'll see in a second, the size of the whole pie doesn't always tell you how big each slice is.
And that brings us to the real kicker. Despite that massive $3.9 trillion pie, when you have to divide it up into 1.45 billion slices, well, the average slice is just $2,695. To put that into perspective, compare it to the United States at around $89,000, or China at roughly $13,000. This is the paradox we're digging into today. It's the stark contrast between macroeconomic might and microeconomic reality. At $2,695, the average citizen is still firmly planted in the lower middle-income bracket.
Just so we're all completely on the same page, let's quickly define what we mean by the size of the slice. Per capita income is literally just the total national income divided by the population. Why does this matter? Because it separates the sheer size of a country's economy from its actual average prosperity. You know, a country can have a totally enormous GDP simply because it has a massive amount of people working, even if those individuals are earning very little. So per capita income cuts right through the noise of population size. It shows us the actual, everyday economic reality of a single person living there.
Now, before we dive into the roadblocks keeping that per capita number low, we absolutely have to acknowledge India's recent history, because the progress since 2000 has been nothing short of undeniable. The economy has nearly quadrupled in real terms, and get this, per capita income has actually tripled. Extreme poverty has seen a sharp, historic drop, and digital inclusion has spread like wildfire, at a rate very few countries have ever pulled off. So credit where credit is due. Hundreds of millions of lives have genuinely improved. But even with this massive leap forward, some really stubborn structural hurdles are still in the way.
Which brings us to the diagnosis. Why exactly do incomes remain so low?
The big question is this: if the economy is booming and progress is zooming along, why aren't paychecks reflecting that? Well, just boosting overall GDP isn't going to cut it. When you're adding huge numbers of workers to your population every single decade, your economic growth has to outrun that addition. You need jobs, better productivity, and higher wages all happening at once. But India is dealing with a massive informal economy. We're talking millions of small, cash-based businesses with very little tech and almost zero access to finance. That informality is a huge bottleneck for productivity and tax revenue. Plus, a shockingly low female labor force participation rate means a huge chunk of the population just isn't able to contribute to the formal economy.
And that leads us to one of the biggest root causes of the whole issue. It's a concept called disguised unemployment. Look at it this way. Right now, nearly half of India's entire workforce is in agriculture. But agriculture makes up a much smaller piece of the actual economic output. What does that mean in plain English? It means a lot of agricultural workers are basically surplus. They could literally pack up, leave their farms, and find jobs somewhere else without total farming output dropping at all. They're working hard, sure, but they're generating very low value, which acts like a heavy anchor dragging down the national average income.
Now, this is fascinating. History shows us that countries that successfully broke out of middle-income status, places like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, they all followed a really specific playbook. First agriculture, then a massive shift into labor-intensive manufacturing, and finally, high-end services. Manufacturing is the ultimate sponge for surplus labor. It provides mass jobs, tech skills, and vital export money. But India, they kind of skipped a step. They largely jumped straight from agriculture right into services. They completely bypassed the massive manufacturing boom that built the middle class in East Asia, which unfortunately left millions of those rural workers with nowhere to go.
Adding a whole other layer to this puzzle is a pretty severe human capital mismatch. Every single year, India pumps out millions of engineers, MBAs, and college grads. You'd think, right, this is a massive advantage, and it absolutely can be, but employers are constantly sounding the alarm about a serious shortage of industry-ready skills. There's this huge disconnect between what schools are teaching and what modern companies actually need to grow. So you end up with this tragic irony. Graduates are desperately searching for good jobs, while companies are desperately searching for capable workers.
Okay, so that's the diagnosis. Now, let's look at the prescription. What exactly is the roadmap to high income status?
We know why the per capita income is stubbornly stuck, so the ultimate goal isn't just a bigger economy, it's a more productive one. India's #1 challenge right now is increasing GDP per worker. That is the golden metric. And making that happen relies heavily on 3 really clear, actionable steps. We have to take that surplus labor, the folks caught in disguised unemployment, and move them into higher productivity sectors. That means expanding manufacturing aggressively, creating millions of formal jobs, and decisively bringing more women into the paid workforce.
Let's break down that first step. We aren't just talking about making basic everyday goods. India needs a heavy expansion into high-value manufacturing. Think electronics, semiconductor assembly, defense production, electric vehicles, renewable energy, the whole high-tech shebang. Why focus here? Because these are the golden sectors that offer massive, large-scale employment while raking in crucial export dollars. And remember, domestic demand on its own is never going to be enough to absorb everything a rapidly industrializing economy makes. You've got to export to the world, and these are exactly the products the world is buying right now.
Moving to step 3, and honestly, this might be the most massive, untapped engine for national prosperity in India today. Empowering women to enter the formal workforce is not just a nice social goal, it is hard, undeniable economic math. Improving safe transport, offering affordable childcare, and pushing equal opportunity policies, these things can unlock millions of workers. When female employment goes up, household incomes literally instantly rise, national savings grow, the tax base expands, and GDP growth just accelerates. It's an absolute game changer.
But to actually support all these new workers and factories, India has to bridge a very specific gap. On one hand, you've got amazing digital success. India has built world-class digital public infrastructure. Think Aadhaar for digital ID or UPI for instant zero-cost payments. I mean, these systems are modern marvels that pull businesses out of the cash-based shadows. But contrast that incredible digital success with some serious physical deficits. We're talking high logistics costs, uneven infrastructure between states, and just crazy urban congestion. You know, you can't exactly export a physical semiconductor over a digital payment network, right? The physical infrastructure simply has to catch up to the digital brilliance.
Finally, let's look at the math of growth and the ticking clock to 2047.
To really grasp this, we have to talk about the magic of compounding. Just look at the insane difference between growing at 5% versus 8%. If your per capita income grows at 5%, it's going to take about 14 years to double it. But if you can just push that needle to 8%, you double incomes in only 9 years. The World Bank points out that for India to actually hit high-income status by its target year of 2047, it needs to sustain an average annual growth of about 7.8% for the next 2 decades. That is a monumental task that requires relentless, perfect execution.
As you can see, shifting from merely holding the title of the 4th largest economy to actually having a truly wealthy population, that takes massive, sustained structural shifts. You just can't rely on population growth anymore. To triple average incomes in just a decade, India needs exceptionally rapid productivity growth. They need broad-based job creation in formal sectors, non-stop workforce reskilling, and ironclad macroeconomic stability to keep inflation down and investments pouring in.
So, that brings us to the ultimate question. The roadmap is crystal clear. We know exactly what needs to be done. Move labor from farms to factories, formalize the economy, empower female workers, and fix the physical infrastructure. But as we all know, execution is literally everything. So I leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. Can India actually execute these massive structural shifts? Can they sustain this unprecedented compounding economic momentum for the next 20 years to turn all that aggregate national wealth into everyday prosperity for 1.45 billion people? It's an economic journey that will absolutely define the 21st century.